Welcome to 98.5 Canonical Chronicle with your host, Stan Rogers, with our guest for today, English Extension student Amelia Price. So let's get right into it. Adaptations are taking over every aspect of entertainment industry. Emmy, why do you think it has become such a big phenomenon?
I think a big aspect of why it's becoming so much more prominent is because people don't even realise that adaptations are taking over. Some adaptations are so covertly hidden that people don't even realise they are based on another book. So the question I would pose to you, Stan, is can copies be original? I mean, here's an example, Bridget Jones's Diary. Because from the outset, the concept does seem pretty original. It follows the titular character, Bridget Jones, as she goes through her day-to-day activities and writes them down in a diary in order to improve herself. The story takes off when she meets a man at a dinner party, and it hilariously follows a convoluted love triangle between them. And when you examine it, you can see really how similar it is to Pride and Prejudice. It has a firm meaning of the literary period and contextual values of the book. One that really stood out to me when reading it was how the literary period value and emphasis on emotion was carried over through both, but in different formats. Pride and Prejudice is a product of Romanticism, characterised by a celebration of nature, individual experiences of the sublime, and more relevant to what we are talking about, the emphasis on emotion and inner world. This point is emphasised in both books, both in completely different ways and for completely different reasons. In Pride and Prejudice, Austen does this through a type of diction known as free indirect discourse. This is when a character's thoughts or spoken words are written without quotation marks or indications, such as he said, she said. This therefore allows the reader direct insight into the emotions of certain characters without disrupting the flow of the passage, allowing for more personal comprehension and appreciation of this emotion. Sometimes her use of it is more subtle, and other times you can clearly pick it out. Here's an example for you. Austen uses free indirect discourse in the passage where Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth, and she uses it to further characterise and give readers an insight into his psyche during this moment. It reads, Mr. Collins received and returned Mrs. Bennet's felicitations with equal pleasure, and then proceeded to relay the particulars of their interview, with the result of which he trusted he had every reason to be satisfied, since the refusal in which his cousin had given him would have naturally flowed from a bashful modesty and the genuine delicacy of her character. See how clean that transition between perceived third and first person narration. And it works very effectively, despite not being first person. Anyway, so while Pride and Prejudice is able to do it through this way, Bridget Jones's Diary has undergone the macro-linguistic change into being entirely first-person narration, because obviously it is a diary. This change of format is effective as it relays Bridget's emotions in this retrospective, conscious, subjective way, and develops personal relationship between reader and writer because of it. But while it affirms this aspect of the Romantic period, it also alters it in a way. I think the author does this not only to keep true to the emphasis of emotion seen in Pride and Prejudice, but also to appeal to the literary period values of the 90s and the rise of the relatable archetype. We have continued to see growth in popularity of these sorts of characters since the postmodernism era, and the 90s are credited with beginning this trend.
The rise of relatable character has also been seen further adapted in more newer adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, hasn't it? The emphasis on emotion seen in Pride and Prejudice has kind of transformed into later adaptations to become synonymous with relatable. And what's more relatable than YouTube? There's this one YouTube series, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is another adaptation, where the diary format has taken a step further to become a vlog format.
Yeah, 100%. The Lizzie Bennet Diaries is an interesting example because it takes aspects of both Bridget Jones's Diary and Pride and Prejudice, as the vlog format allows a primary perspective to come from Lizzie and her own personal monologues, as well as her friends. Oh, and by the way, a vlog is a video blog. The breaking of the fourth wall using the vlog format enhances the emphasis on emotion. By utilising it, Lizzie destroys the barrier between her audience and her, familiarising us in her inner world. This immerses us in their lives, and so we become invested in the characters presented to us. The vlog format allows Lizzie to narrate to her audience from a subjective first-person point of view like a diary, but it still includes elements of an omnipresent narrator by having other people in it. In doing this, the entire series centres around all the characters, and while it's predominantly based on Lizzie, it also allows other characters to continue on the narration. So in this aspect, it takes elements from both previous texts and effectively affirms the emphasis on emotion and inner world through a new format and for a new audience. Because think about it, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries was produced during this relatable postmodernistic era on YouTube. It's aimed at a younger demographic who are attracted to YouTube's interesting content. Imagine how boring it would be to this younger generation who use the YouTube format if it was produced in the same way as the original Pride and Prejudice, or even Bridget Jones for that matter. The mix allows the story to continue into a modern generation successfully without eliminating core literary period values.
Is this the only thing that has carried through? Surely there must be more.
No, there is definitely more. A contextual value that has been carried through, but adapted, was societal pressures of finding a husband. And a literary value that has been carried through is the satirical lens in which it is presented. Since this book was written in the Georgian era, the societal pressures at the time were for all eligible women to find a husband. This was very important, as in those days a husband was chosen more on financial gain than compatibility. The theme of marriage is pretty much the focal point of the entire book, with all important plot elements centering around the quest to find a suitable husband. So obviously this would be an overarching theme in the text, because women at the time reading the book could relate to the constant importance placed on it, and could enjoy the satire of these exact pressures. Austen is able to do this by strongly characterizing contemporary stereotypes. She does this effectively through Mrs. Bennet. She puts Mrs. Bennet in cringe-inducing but comedic situations in which the reader can clearly see that she's been ridiculed by the characters and Austen herself. By doing this, Austen utilizes the technique of satire to poke fun at the values of the time, and does this effectively. She also subverts this contemporary norm, as the main relationship of the book, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, get together because of love and not riches. Both these literary and contextual values have been carried into the other two adaptations, but they're altered in a way that keeps in line with the contemporary norms of the time. For both of these, the societal pressure is definitely lessened, as both in the 90s and 2010s in which they are both produced, the pressure isn't close to home at all. In these current societies, women have a choice to get married, and so their inner world isn't so closely centered around prospective husbands. So both authors have adapted this in their own way to stay relevant and give into the contextual norms of their own times. In Bridget Jones, the whole relationship dramas with the sisters is eliminated, and instead just focuses on Bridget's own love triangle, evidently to make the story more realistic to viewers. To make it more realistic, romance is only a facet of Bridget's life. We get to see other parts of it, such as her quest to lose weight, stop smoking, etc. And so while this contextual value is slightly altered, the literary satirical lens has also been altered in order to stay relevant. It now satirizes the myth of self-perfection that is rampant in American culture. Helen Fielding herself said in an interview, there is a, quote, strong culture of self-improvement in America, and, quote, the endless search for self-improvement is a modern disease. And so by putting Bridget in these hopeless, exaggerated situations in pursuit of self-improvement, Fielding mocks this part of American culture, just like how Austen mocked the culture of her own day. This is also seen in the Lizzie Bennet diaries. Obviously, in the 2010s, we've had the third wave rise of feminism, and so it would not make any sense for a modern day viewer if their whole worlds revolved around romance, and in fact there might even be a large outcry. In the Lizzie Bennet diaries, proposals are replaced with job offers, and of course they still keep the relationship with Darcy, but less emphasis is put on it, and he only appears on screen in episode 60 out of 100 for the first time. And once again, the literary satirical lens in which he is presented is also altered. Mrs. Bennet is yet again poked fun of, but in this adaptation, her views on marriage are presented as ridiculous because they are, quote, old-fashioned. The writers deliberately play up and exaggerate her outdated views to satire this old way of thinking, and show that we have moved forward into this era of independent women. Also, because of the demographic it is appealing to, the satirical lens is in this overarching, subtle concept that kind of envelopes the entire text like Pride and Prejudice and Bridget Jones. Instead, the sarcasm is more straightforward and simplified just to become part of Lizzie's personality.
Yeah, Lizzie is pretty sassy. The writers use a simple eye roll or change of voice to convey to the audience that Lizzie isn't feeling it. All very simple but effective.
And in doing this, the writers affirm and carry forward the contextual values of the time, but once again alter it to appeal to their audiences and keep it relevant. So in conclusion, both adaptations of the canonical text have affirmed but altered the contextual, literary, and literary period values in order to become accessible to a new generation. They do this by commenting on past societies and norms, and often by doing this, the adaptations do become original in their own way, as our contemporary culture is continuously changing, and so there's always continuously new material to update. So in saying this and keeping these values in mind, do you really think that copies can be original?
For all those listening, send in your answers and tune in next week to find out the answer.